My guest today is a great friend and fellow actor, having been in several independent and student films together, including Legacy, Shrapnel, 60 Seconds to Die, The First Date, as well as the awesome South Australian independent feature film Are We Heroes, directed by the awesome Aaron Giagu. He started early in the industry, partaking in an amateur theatre group in 1979, but then he moved on to the other side of the stage and camera by learning many crew roles, including lighting, audio, and he became an entertainment facilitator. This continued on through the 1990s with the establishment of his own production company. But his love of acting has brought him full circle, and in 2013 he completed a screen acting course at the Adelaide College of the Arts, which led him to numerous lead and support roles in many South Australian productions, including those mentioned just now. He's a very well-known member of the Adelaide film community with his all-round knowledge of the game, working as an actor or crew, or quite often both. Please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Tim Hawkins.
Thanks, Dave. It's good to be here.
Do a little clap.
Thanks very much.
And this is our, for those watching on YouTube, it's our first in-room interview, so I'm trying to work out whether I'm more nervous now in person or online.
Are you nervous? Are you trying to make me nervous?
How are you feeling? Yeah. So, I mean, you're very well adverse to having a camera in your face anyway.
Yeah, nerves is something I don't really get much anymore. I used to get a bit of it, but no, doesn't happen.
Well, then, so let's go from there then. Tell us a bit about yourself, where you've come from. I've given a bit of an intro to you, but where have you come from acting and why and how and where? How did you end up to where you are today?
Just the love of performance art has always been, my motivation. I've always been into the arts, as you know. When I left school, I did graphic design. Went and did a course in graphic design. That wasn't good enough for my father. You need to get a trade behind you, So I had to do night school to do art, and I was doing an apprenticeship during the day.
Okay.
And that didn't eventuate into anything. In fact, neither did, apart from just work. Like jobs, like working, as a motor mechanic, because that was the trade I did. For a few years, that got a bit boring, and I moved interstate to Sydney, chasing some work over there in the early 80s, and that was when I got involved in, the late 70s, early 80s. That's when I got involved with some amateur theatre stuff, and it took about 4 to 6 months before I realised I can actually make money out of doing the production for this stuff more than I can actually being in it, as fun as it was.
Yeah.
I had a young family at that time, and I needed to, put food on the table.
Of course.
So that was the priority then. And that went on, as you said, years and years of working in production after that, and lighting and sound was lighting was my main forte. I did both, but lighting became the thing I love, and I still love it, but I'm not as capable of doing it anymore, and it's the industry's really moved forward. If you're out of it for 5 years, it's a lot to learn to get back into it, you've got the equipment is just being updated, and technically everything changes over a 5-year period. I went from equipment being analog to digital. I was there for all of that
huge change.
Massive. Well, it was completely different, and I was there for that whole, right through all of that. So, I don't have the time in me now to go back to learn any more skills. I got back into acting, as you said, in about 2012, 2013, and really, that's all I want to do is performance art. I play in bands and stuff as well.
Yes.
So, and I've always done that from about the age of 17 or 18. I was playing in bands. That was what got me involved in the theatre over in Sydney. Was people I met through music over there.
Okay. What's your background in music? What instrument do you play?
I started off when I was 7. I learnt the violin for a couple of years.
Wow.
Then I moved on to woodwinds, and then by the time I was 13 or 14, I picked up the guitar and started learning the guitar. Although mostly self-taught the guitar because I'd already done years of training. Yeah. But and I have had some lessons along the way, but it was one of those things that it was just sort of picked it up and played
awesome.
it.
Do you sing?
Backing vocals, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I do backing vocals. I can't sing and play at the same time, essentially, so that's quite difficult, although I can do backing vocals. So to be a lead singer in a band would be, I'd have to put the guitar down.
Fair enough.
And,
that's a big skill for any artist, really, isn't it? It's just you've either got it or you don't. You can do it.
Yeah, that's one of those. Well, you can work on it. You can, when you get more comfortable with what you're playing, you find you can actually sing more when you're really comfortable with what you're playing. But it's not. It's really difficult. Like if you want to be a good singer and hold a note, for me, it's just put the guitar down.
Oh, fair enough.
And I don't really want to be a good singer and hold a note. I just want to play the guitar. So
fair call. Yeah. So that gives you, so your artistic background has been since you're young. So you've played instruments when you're young. So you've always had that artistic side, both in music and what you've decided is acting. Yeah,
I guess so. I've always been technically, I've always loved technical technology as well. So that's where the two paired in with lighting so well, was doing that course in motor mechanics. And then later on I did some courses in robotics and other things just out of interest. But I was always into the workings of things, how things worked, as well as being artistic, musical and performance and art, drawing.
Excellent.
Sketching, painting, and.
And so, us being in the modern times now, and I was just talking to you before about with my setup and my cameras, and that I've been messing with my sound, trying to make my mic sound so much better, but then I've got that working when I'm on manual mode with my SLR, but I can't figure out how to use the camera in manual mode for filming. So there's just so many aspects of technology that I hate. And obviously, if you're not up with it, it just snowballs you, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's one of those things. If you let it get ahead of you, then it really does get ahead of you. You have to keep up with it. But you would be able to sort that out with just. No. Have you read the manual?
No. Do men read manuals?
Well, yes, you do.
I mean, and that's a big thing too with the modern day now is we've got YouTube. So most of the stuff when I do figure out I need to do something, I just jump on YouTube. But that's, and as I said, I figured out the sound. Now I've got to move on and say, how do I do the camera? So, but you could, if you mess it up, you mess it up. So you need to find the time to do it, not now. So if I tried to do it now, I may end up messing up our whole podcast. And
don't play around with it now, Dave.
I did a self-tape once when I switched to this was before I was even messing with the sound. I did a self-tape saying, I've got to try and use manual because then I can get the better focus and everything. Yeah. And right. I had something wrong in the settings. So bring it to the acting then, and we'll talk about your journey over that time. But and you've mentioned that you were doing stuff in the 80s. So I'm trying not to allude to how old you are or am not. So what are you, 45? You're younger than me. Yeah. We'll go with that, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, 45.
Would you consider yourself a late bloomer actor then?
Yeah, pretty much. I think so. By the time it was 2000, the year 2000, I'd pretty much given up the idea of actually going back to performance art. I was working at the Adelaide Convention Centre then as one of the head lighting techs there. I was there for 13 years and it was a good job, and I kind of saw my future being that and hadn't really thought about getting back into the acting as well. I did do some in the late 90s. I did a few TV commercials. It was really different back then. There was no internet. There was no, if you didn't have an agent, you weren't going to get anything. Trying to find the work yourself back then was nearly impossible. You had to have an agent. Now, these days, with the online, everything online, you can find acting work without an agent, and quite a lot of it, as I have over the years.
Both paid and independent stuff.
Yeah,
as well,
paid and there's a lot of free stuff, as you know. You do the free stuff, and like I always say, if I had that big film every year where I was getting a good whack of money from each year, I wouldn't mind doing the free stuff forever.
Yes. Yeah, it sort of gets a bit tiresome after. Well, tiresome's probably not the right word, I suppose, is it? It's more of, you're doing. My agent likes to say, you're doing all the right things. Yeah, I'm doing all the right thing, but where's that paid professional role sort of thing?
Yeah.
Do you find that
Yeah, it's frustrating, but you look around and you go, well, there's people with agents and they're getting very little as well, and you think, well, maybe there just isn't a lot of work around, and you can't. It's not one of those things. I don't stress out about it, Dave. You know, like I just play it as it goes. You know, I don't stress out. I think it was 2015. I worked in 16 films. That year, you know, and that was a big year. That was a really good year. The following year, I did 8, including a couple of film clips for bands, and then the year after that, I probably did 3. You know, it's just the way it goes.
And it's an industry that changes a lot. I mean, a big thing is looks as well, and ages and everything like that. So the year that you were doing 16, they might have needed elder gentlemen with beards, sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I wasn't as elderly then either.
Elderly? That's the wrong word, sorry.
Yeah, I was, that's back when I was only 40.
Wow.
Remember?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm trying to work out how long have we known each other then, so it's been a while.
I think it was about 2014 when we first met.
Pretty close, yeah, definitely. And I think the first film we were on was Legacy. Was it
Was it Legacy?
Or did I don't go before that.
I don't recall Legacy.
Legacy's the student film where I was playing the bad dad.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Didn't we do the one with Adam Webber?
Was that before then?
I think
60 Seconds to Die.
Yeah,
I played the priest.
That was the first one. Yeah, I played the priest,
and I played the bad guy with the gun. So,
well, you played the poor bad guy with the gun.
Bad guy,
yeah,
definitely.
The sad fellow. Yeah.
So, would you consider yourself? Over your career, you've had a myriad of work. Are you retired now, or are you just continually working?
No, I'm not retired. I don't think I'll ever retire. There's always something to do.
Oh, beautiful.
You know, I won't retire, Dave. That's not in me. You know, I might have a break of doing strenuous work for a couple of years, but.
Yeah, we were saying before how lighting's changed. I said, do you get to a point where you just can't climb up the ladders anymore?
Oh, it's not ladders. It's all elevated working platforms and knuckle booms and things like that. You know, when you're going up 18 metres, you're not using a ladder. But no, that's not. It's the weight of those lights. You know, I injured a shoulder a few years ago, and I still carry that injury. And that's kept me out of it for quite a while.
Oh, that's a shame, isn't it?
Yeah. It's heavy lifting. Lots of rigging and heavy lighting. You know, so it's not a lot of fun. That's why I like doing film lighting so much, because it's all fairly lightweight.
Okay.
You know, and
especially with the independent productions of which you're on just about every.
And if it's a bigger production, then you've got younger guys that can do that lifting. For you. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So you're acting now, you're in a spot now where you can say, look, I've always wanted to do it, and you can focus on it a bit more, which is a good thing because you can pick and choose.
Yeah, that's right.
So what draws you to acting itself?
What drew me back to acting really was just watching other actors act.
Awesome.
You know, and just going, this person is just amazing. They're so convincing. You know, when you see someone... maybe back with Breaking Bad, Bryan Cranston, you know, and going, like, this guy really knows how to do it, and then going, I just want to do that again. I want to be in that place where you can forget about, you know what it's like, you forget about everything that's on in your life, and the only thing that you're thinking about is that scene that you are in right now.
Making it work, bring it to life.
Yeah, and it's like nothing else. There's nothing else going on in your head. I did a lot of. I played a lot of sport as well. I played a lot of cricket, and I did a lot of cricket umpiring. Cricket umpiring was very similar. It's you're zoning in on something, and that's all. You're not thinking about that bill you got to pay next week. You're not thinking, I didn't get to pay my phone bill today. I hope they don't cut it off. It's like. You're not thinking about anything else, and it's the same with acting. It's just like this scene right now is the only thing in the world right now for me.
Maybe that's why we've established that a lot of people think the umpires on AFL are no good. Maybe they're thinking about their bills that are really too much.
Yeah,
no, they're not doing their job.
Yeah, well, they're not clearly.
So when you first started acting way back when, before you decided you needed to go and make some money and you got into lighting, it was a stage. So was it just happened to be stage, or did you find stage was a more positive experience?
No, it was just that's what was there at the time.
Okay.
That was the only reason. It was an easy decision to make because it was there, happening right there and then.
Awesome.
And we needed lighting, and we needed someone that knew how to use it, and so I taught myself, basically, and then took it from there.
Beautiful,
Yeah.
beautiful. And so you're with your training, so you've done a bit at AC Arts.
I did a lot of training later. I mean, I was working as a lighting technician for 20 years before I actually did any training, and then I went in and trained people at TAFE. I was training people at
on the
TAFE.
lighting side of stuff.
Yes,
oh, brilliant.
yes, and I was awarded my certificates just through required prior learning.
Awesome.
Through TAFE as well, so I could teach. Yeah.
Right. And so with your acting, did you do AC Arts as an acting course as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I did AC Arts acting courses.
How long was that?
Oh, that was the 6-month course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would that be the most formal training you've probably done then?
Yeah, that, and just a stack of the workshops and as we've done, the weekend workshops and all the stuff. Yeah, but that was it for me. I had to get out of the learning situation as quickly as I could. It's one of those things that everyone's different, and everyone takes learning things a different way. I kind of feel like I learnt everything I was going to learn in 6 months, and I've learnt a lot more on the job since then. But I think, if I'd have stayed in school learning it at acting school,
yes.
I wouldn't have probably learnt it how I've learnt it out of there. You know what I mean?
And that's interesting because I had a big chat on my last episode with Andrew Hurl, he's the CEO of StageMilk.com. So he went to WAPA and did the full 3 years, and we were discussing the ages on the course, and what that time the oldest person on the course was about 32. And it was interesting the way we went with the discussion because he brought it to what the older actors can bring for the younger actors. So we talked about life skills and how that enhances their acting. So with the little bit of formal training you've done and the courses and all the workshops that we jump on board, do you find that when you're on set that you're drawing more on your life experience, who you are and what you've done, rather than some formal
Absolutely,
toolbox?
yeah. I've never found a method in an acting course that will work for everything that I'm doing. You know what I mean? I really do draw on my life experiences for my acting. I'm a character actor. I love playing characters, and I always manage to find a method to get to that character using a life experience of my own, or something that I've seen happen around me.
So how do you make a character come to life to you? Then is it just on the day? I'm in the moment. This is who I am, or do you have some sort of way that you build up to that, leading up to the filming of that movie or that scene?
Just apart from all the pre homework that you do before you get there, like learning your lines and like it's the backstory of the character is what I really want to get to know. I really want to get to know that character, who he was before this happened, and if there isn't a backstory, I'll develop one.
Anyway, okay.
Yeah, and to make that work for the character. Also, you need to be discussing this stuff with your director, of course. I like to be on the same page as a director. It's nothing worse than having a director that doesn't direct you. I like being directed.
Yeah,
I very much like being directed. I want to be in tune with that director, knowing exactly what he wants from this character, so I know that when I deliver that character the way that I feel it needs to be delivered, because that's what he wants, I'm confident that is what he wants. There's nothing worse than doing something and sitting in the back of your head going, I wonder if he's happy. I wonder if that's what he wants.
Yes.
So I do like being directed. And you mentioned Aaron earlier with... what was it called? Are We Heroes? And now Warpath Chronicle. Well, that will be that will be released later this year, Warpath Chronicle.
Everyone's hanging out to see that, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
It's such a big production.
Yeah, massive, and hundreds of people involved as well. Just about, just so many people throughout Adelaide were involved in that at some stage. But he is a very, very good director, that guy. He is really, really good. He gives you the time to hone that character really well. He discusses with you what that character's all about really well. And I would be in anything that Aaron's directing absolutely straight away if he asked me again.
Yeah, I've just done my first scene on Blood Brother. Is it
Blood City?
Blood City.
Yeah.
And so we just did my first scene with them last week. So it was
I was supposed to be there. Remember?
Yes, Mr. The flu man. So
yeah, I had the flu.
The joys. I mean, and that's the thing especially with independent productions, is you're at the whim of anything like the flu or people not being available. So
yeah.
And that's what I love about, especially the Adelaide environment. Everyone works together as a team, and they take it on board. So they found something. They said, hey, Tim, don't worry about it, man. We've got you back, and they'll be ready for you next week. So,
yeah.
But
that's right.
Bringing back to Aaron, he's open to you deliver your scene, and then he'll say, hey, can we do it this way? And he doesn't, I don't take any offence if we change it, and it's good, or... most times it's hey, love it, next, let's go to the next scene. So.
I've usually found with Aaron that is if he does correct something, that when I look at it later and I can see why he corrected it. It's really good having a director that is smart enough to see that while it's happening, and then not having to go away and then calling you back days later saying we need to do that again.
They have the bigger picture too, because they know the whole story concept. They've probably filmed a lot more that you haven't been involved in. So, especially for something like Warpath, going back to you're talking about characters, it's not like we're delivering a drama with a husband and wife or a breakup marriage or anything. We're talking a different genre and time, and
it's
a completely fantasy story, isn't it? So to be able to take that. I think when I filmed my first scene, which unfortunately won't be used, but because we weren't able to finish it, that's a whole other story in itself. But I found the hardest thing was trying to develop a voice, the accent of a fantasy character, because it wasn't set in any place or time, so to speak. But it's an Australian production, but you can't have an Aussie delivering this fantasy. So how'd you go with that, with developing an accent?
Yeah, I used an English accent all the way through Warpath Chronicle, and it wasn't your London, your Cockney type of accent. It was more of your probably more of a Michael Caine kind of
nice. Dark and deep.
Yeah. And because I could be consistent with that, I knew I could get all in my moods with that, using that accent. So I could be angry, I could be sad, I could be happy, using that same accent and it not faltering. Picking an accent, that's the one thing you've got to make sure that you can actually hold that accent right through every emotion that the character's got to play in the series. And that's kind of difficult. And I found with that accent that I could do it. I found with my Cockney accent is I'm a little bit up there, too high, voice. And I thought I didn't want to be that. I'll bring it down, slow it down, talk a bit more, like an educated man a little bit more.
Yes.
And
it's a well-spoken English in that sort of fantasy environment.
Yeah, nearly well-spoken. Yeah. Still drops his H's and, more like I guess it's like a Birmingham accent maybe, but I'm not really sure on that. But I made it up and it worked. And,
that's all that matters, isn't it?
Yeah, and but that was fun, and I love working with accents. I always think the accent just takes me that one step further away from Tim Hawkins and being that actual character. You don't want your character to feel too much like David Clarke. You want that character to be this character.
Definitely.
So if someone else was to play that character, there are idiosyncrasies of little pieces of that character that another actor could do. And do that character well. Look at all of the Doctor Who's that have been throughout the years, and yet they've all got these similar little traits that is typically Doctor Who, even though they're all these different actors.
Yes.
And so it's good if you can do that. But the other beautiful thing about working on productions like Warpath Chronicle is that no one's ever done that character before. It's yours.
And always will be.
And it always will be, yeah. And other people might come along and try and do it, but there'll always be people who go, oh, yeah, but you'll never do it as well as David Clarke did it, you know.
Okay. Yes.
And that may well be true because it was your character. You know, you designed that. You gave birth to that character.
Especially for a show like Warpath, a little bit different when you talk stage productions, so Shakespeare or Hamlet to Hamlet, and you have one actor will deliver a Hamlet, and then another actor, it's still the same character, but other people will deliver it different. And it's sort of, you were saying how you love the idea of bringing a character and making it real, but do you feel that there's always a bit of you in there? I mean, through a lot of my training I've done with Greg Apps, there's not a lot of character actors in the world, as in who become completely different. Johnny Depp is classic character actor. He can play so many different people and you recognise them as the character he's playing, not Johnny Depp. But Tom Cruise is Tom Cruise.
Yeah,
doesn't matter
absolutely.
whether he's in Top Gun.
Johnny Depp is, he's... yeah, that guy's just incredible. I mean, I watch films with Johnny Depp in it, and it takes me 20 minutes to realise it's Johnny Depp.
Yes,
I mean, seriously, you know that. And when that happens to me, for me, that is really good character acting.
That's awesome.
You know, and that really does it for me when that happens. There was another one that was a series that came out a couple of years ago called Godless. And the main guy in it, it took me 15 minutes to work out it was Jeff Daniels.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, okay. And he was just outstanding, but it was like I've never seen him before. And
I have to look that one up because I like Jeff Daniels, but
it was incredible. It took me seriously, it took me 15 minutes, and I'm sitting there going, "Who is this guy? I know this guy." And then I went, "Oh, look, it's Jeff Daniels!" Like unbelievable. But yeah, what a character.
I mean, I get a lot of my scenes that I'll do my self-tapes, and I said, there was too much of David in that. There was too much of you, and your niceness is coming through. And I go, well, it's nice that people say I'm a nice guy, but if it's coming through on a tape, especially if it's not meant to be a nice guy, then...
that's not right.
No, it's not right. No. And that's where the acting ability comes in.
Yeah, that's it, you know. That's if you're not playing a nice guy, then you can't be a nice guy. You know, there's no nasty way to be a nice guy, and there's no nice way to be a nasty guy. You know,
but you can bring attributes to it. Some people play a bad guy, and they're just always bad. But you know, why are they bad? Why are they evil, or are they psychopathic? But they've still got something inside.
Are they always bad, or is there something that triggers them to be bad, or you know?
So you can draw on that as well. So if you know that there's a lot of your niceness comes out, then you've got to find a way to have that work in with the characters. And that's where all your acting skills come from. Whether you do 3 years at WAPA or Whopper. I keep saying WAPA. I did that in my last podcast. I kept saying WAPA. But if you've done that formal training, or you just learn, you know, it's about changing your mindset when you're on scene. And we were just talking about before we started about how you saw after I did the 26 self-tapes for May, how different it was at the end, and how if better is the better word, but
that's for want of a better word, better. But what I was getting at is and what I said was after that. Imagine if you were acting every day, and you know, like you noticed after 26 days, was it?
26 tapes over a month.
If you noticed that, and I noticed it, and other people would have noticed it after 26 days. Imagine if you had been acting every day for 260 days. You know, and you have to get better, wouldn't you? You know, like you would have to be improving. Everyone would have to be improving.
And you see that a lot in, especially TV series. My son loves Supernatural, and I've watched the whole series. But if you go back and watch the first couple of episodes, the difference in the boys' characters, Jensen Ackles and his brother, compared to the end, they're different. Obviously, their characters develop over that time, but also your acting skill set and just how you bring that character changes, because You become
that's a bit of a
character
shame.
becomes real, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's a bit of a shame when that happens, though, in a series. And if it's not part of the story arc, and you notice the person getting better all the way through it. It's great that they're getting better, but I'll tell you, Walking Dead, Daryl, what's his name? The guy that plays Daryl.
Oh, you're going to put me on the... Connor will be going...
Norman Reedus.
Norman Reedus, yeah, well done.
Now, when he first started that show, I thought his acting was okay. It was okay. Now, all these years later, it's superb, and he has become a really, really good actor during that time. And I know he's done other things in that time as well.
And he's been around a little bit before that.
Yeah,
as well.
He'd been around and done other things before that. In fact, I think there was. I think I remember seeing something with him on one of Andy McPhee's showreel pieces.
Okay.
And he was in something with Norman Reedus years ago as well, and that would have been probably well before The Walking Dead.
Definitely. Do you think that his acting got better, or did he just grow into the character?
Yeah, I don't really know because I don't know him personally, but I do know that it's noticeable that character is. I think he's developed the character better over that time. I think he's really become that. Yeah, he's become that character more in that time.
I think I felt it a lot in Antares. Independent production, so it wasn't filming as regular as a normal movie would. But by the time we'd finished filming the movie, I could walk on set and felt so much more comfortable. So whether that's a bit of both of just being more comfortable on set or having that character build over time from scene to scene, every scene you become the character a lot more. So it's a very interesting...
Was it a confident character? Was it the character?
A security officer. So yeah, it was a confident role.
You played a security officer?
In space.
How unusual.
Yeah,
Have you ever played a security officer before?
No. Not a security officer. Always a police officer. But that's another story in itself.
Yeah. Hey, What's like me being the barman?
How many barmans have you
Well,
done?
yeah, the guys from Blood City asked me if I can come in and do a spot in that for them as an actor as well as working on the crew. And I said, oh, yeah. And they said, do you mind being a barman? And I thought, oh, no, not again. Like Arathias was the innkeeper in Warpath Chronicle. I did a film with Simon Tate a few years ago where I played a barman. That was with Eva as well.
Yep.
And I did a film that same year with Vincent Donato where I played John the barman. And then the following year I worked with Fury Fingers guys on Love Guns and Level Ups and played a barman.
I remember. I watched that series. That was good. So. But that being said, that if you could get acting work all the time, especially paid, how many times would you play a barman if you got paid?
Yeah, well, I've never been a barman, but I've never actually been a barman
in real life.
No, never, not ever. But yeah,
but that's acting for you, isn't it? You can do things.
Well,
within reason.
Yeah, we all know how the barman works.
Yeah, you just get a tea towel in one hand and a glass in the other. Then
shine up that glass.
I did. I think I was on the first date. I played.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
and it was a tea towel in the left hand and a cup in the other.
Yeah, you finish it. You throw the tea towel over your shoulder, and we know how to be the barman, mate.
So sorry, go on.
Sorry, yeah, no, and the barman is the guy that like everyone loves to chat with the barman, don't they? They tell the barman all of their woes and troubles,
It's one of those pivotal roles in so many shows, I suppose. They can be that one scene role, or they can be in every scene of the movie. So, hey, I wouldn't knock any role.
No, me neither. There's nothing wrong with being a barman in a TV show for sure.
So, what can you remember what your first lead role would have been in anything? You've had a few now in independent productions and everything across the board.
Yeah, I can't. It's funny when you put me on the spot. I can barely remember a single movie.
Amazing the memory how it works, isn't it? And I love how people say, "Oh, when you say I'm an actor, oh, what have I seen you in?"
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden you're on the. I'm trying to remember.
What would they have seen me in? I think it was when I did the domestic violence film. called It Tastes Like. I think it was called It Tastes Like. That was with some that was a student film. A student film from, I think it was about 2015, 2014, late 2014, and I played an abusive father of the main girl in the film. We were basically the two. Well, there was three main characters in this film, the short film, and that was a fun role to play. And it was he was very violent, a very abusive guy. You know, the film is one of these films they put trigger warnings up at the beginning of the film and everything like that, because it was it was a film, a study on domestic violence, basically. And it was interesting because after that we got asked by the White Ribbon Society, which is the domestic violence, fight against domestic violence people, if we could perform some of these little scenes for prisoners at Yatala Prison.
Wow, okay.
That pre-release prisoners that were in there for acts of violence, and we went in and played out these domestic scenes in front of these guys, and then they'd have to answer questions about what was going on there. Was he being violent? Was he, was he being manipulative? Was he being a bully and all this? And that was quite good doing that. It was interesting getting in there and doing that, and pretty rewarding too. The guys loved it. They really loved it, and they came up to us at the end and said, "You two were fantastic." And when I watched you doing that, I could see just what an animal I've been in my life, and watching you, I hated you, and that was just really well done, Thanks.
It's fantastic to have that. As actors, you're providing something on stage and as an entertainment, but to see that sort of reaction on another scale, someone is taking you're acting in a fictional way, but they're taking something away from themselves. So that must have been a big moment.
Yeah, that was actually quite rewarding. That was a good feeling. That was one of those warm, fuzzy feelings that you get.
And then talking about characters, because I did a similar role with Cameron Jordan's for a student film, where I had to be the abusive husband to her mum, and then I had to push her around a bit. And it was the first time I'd walked away from a scene where I felt bad. Bad's probably not the right word, but I had a stress reaction to it, and I realised, we talk about actors that get involved in their characters, and we've lost some actors who have got so deep into the Joker, Heath Ledger, for example. He got so deep into that character. Did you find that as well with such a heavy character that you had to find ways to deal with it, or were you able to just turn it off?
I pretty much just switch it on and off.
Okay.
That just I don't dwell on that sort of thing. There's a time if you're angry about something, there's probably good reason, and it's not real anger, it's just acting, and I mean it's convincing, but inside that's not really how I'm feeling. Inside I'm acting. Like I'm acting, but so what they say about acting is whatever you do, don't act.
Yeah. So a lot of actors, some actors can be they're in character the whole time. So you're able to be on set. I've worked with you on set, so I know when you're Tim and I know when you're a character. So have you worked with actors that are always switched on?
Yes. Yeah, I've worked with actors that stay in that zone of that person for days on end.
And how do you find that?
It's difficult.
It's weird.
I did a film years ago with a short film years ago in Queensland with Jason Simmons, who was an Australian from Tasmania, moved to Los Angeles in the 90s, and he was on Baywatch for 3 seasons. He was one of the characters in Baywatch for 3 seasons. And then he did Sharknado and played Baz Hogan in Sharknado.
Okay.
And
one of those movies that everyone thought, what is this crap? And then it becomes a blockbuster.
It was a cult film.
Yes.
And then he did the two-headed shark after that. There's another shark film.
Wow, yeah.
And but he's one of those guys. We played cops in this film that I was in with him called Patch. It was a short film. It was a proof of concept that is still in development now. They're still talking about making the feature film. But we played cops in that, and he hadn't been a cop in anything before, and he loved it, but he was Mr. Policeman the whole time, and we were staying basically in this town in Queensland, and accommodated in the same place. So we were sort of sharing this place together for 2 weeks that we were filming, and he was, it took late at night when he became Jason again.
Might be all right if you're just playing a police officer, but imagine playing a psychopath and you're trying to go down the bar for lunch and you give me a...
Yeah, I don't know, mate. I mean, to be perfectly honest, it will be either that or a police officer. Both would drive me crazy.
So in your acting journey so far, what have been your best or your worst moments? Have you had times that you've just gone, this is why I'm doing acting, or has there been times where you've said, I just don't want to do it anymore? Anything that comes to that really stands out?
Yeah, there's those when you've been on set all day and it's 4:00 in the morning the following morning and you're still on set and they're saying, just a couple more scenes to go now. That's
or
when
take number 72.
And then that's when you're thinking, why am I doing this? I just want to be at home in bed. But then there's times when you're playing, an Arathias or something like that in Warpath Chronicle, and this is just bliss. This is all I want to do. And so there's good and bad moments in everything, and filming's the same. It is. You can hit some lows. It's always more or less. It's about body fatigue for me more than anything.
Yeah.
That other than that, I don't mind.
And you, with your acting, it's not something like a lot of younger actors. They've decided this is what they want to do, and so they need to make a living from it. But I'm in the position with my acting that as much as I want to try and make it work and become a professional actor, I don't need to, and I still have my ebbs and flows where I'm going, why am I doing this? I'm wasting my time. I'm spending more money than I'm not, but I don't need to. You're the same with your acting. You love it so much that it doesn't matter whether you're getting the work or not getting the work. You just keep pushing.
No,
on.
I'll keep pushing it. It's when I was playing music, when I first started playing in bands back in the 70s. I was all about this is all I want to do, and if I'm going to be a musician, then I need to be playing in a band, and that's all I need to be. That's all I can do. I need to concentrate all my efforts on that. So I was broke for years. Yep. Inevitably, I had no money, and that was when I decided this is crazy. I need to work out a way to make money out of this, and I didn't have to go far. I just picked up the lighting and sound and started working with bands doing lighting and sound, and so I had to make it work. But with filming, when I got back into acting in 2013, I'd had jobs and good jobs, and the mortgage was ticking along, and the kids that are out of school, and my kids were grown up by then, and so it was easier for me to do, and I didn't have to make a lot of money out of acting.
Okay.
I just wanted to do it. It's never been about the money.
No, that is a good. I talked with Greg Oates about this a lot, and it was about, he called it a plan B, but it's not a replacement. It's about having a backup, having something that pays the bills while you can do it. And we've had lots of discussions with Stage Milk as well about actors. If you want to be an actor, you've got to be an actor 100%. Well, yes and no, because you need to eat.
Yeah, well, that's right.
And we all know the old actor story in LA where there's every waiter or waitress is an actor.
Yeah.
But you need to pay the bills at the end of the day.
Yeah, well, that's Andy McPhee says the same thing. And have you ever done any courses with Andy?
No, I haven't.
Right.
I've seen a lot of stuff with him, and I just haven't had the opportunity.
He's good, and I've done some stuff with Andy, but he's good like that, and he understands, and he says you've got to have that thing you do, that job that you do, and quite often that job will be something that you really love because it gives you the freedom to do your acting and still pay your bills.
Yeah, if you can find that balance with my shift work, it works really well. I very rarely have clashes where I can't make an acting job work. So
that's
really
right.
Good. And I've got my son Connor at the moment. He's leaning towards the acting journey. So
are you trying to talk him out of it?
Maybe I should, but I wanted to talk him into it so much because he was a little Robbie Williams and he never wanted to do it, and then something happened that he said, "Dad, I want to give it a go." So, but we're at that point now where he's in year 11. We're sort of saying, well, we need to find your backup plan, not your replacement plan. We're not saying you don't do acting, but we need to find something that you can do concurrently.
Yeah.
So he's going to do next year as part of year 12. He's going to do the course, the filmmaking course. So learning all the stuff like you, lighting and sound and that. So at least then, hey, you can go and work on set.
Yeah, that's right.
Again, it's one of those areas finding that balance, because if you're working on set, you might already have the job, and then you get the acting role, then you've got to...
That's the thing, yeah. And the other thing is it's still working in the film industry, and if there's no film work going on, you're still not going to have the work.
Definitely,
that's the thing. It is getting better in South Australia for that, though. We are getting a lot more productions here than we used to. That's... we used to make a lot of our own films in South Australia. That doesn't happen as much, but now there are a lot of companies coming and making films here from overseas, that's really good.
I think it's great, and I would really like to see the government starting to spend a bit more money on developing that as well. I mean, we've got the Mercury CX cinema is almost bankrupt apparently because the government's not paying them out. So whereas in Melbourne and Sydney and even Perth, they're building sound stages and everything now because they recognise that if they put the money in, the money's going to come
back.
That's a real shame. We look at all the development that's happened over at Glenside around the Adelaide studios. They built all these condos.
Yeah,
it could have been a Fox Studios.
It's horrible.
It could have been, that whole space could have been backlots and sound stages and water stages. It could have been it could have been a contender.
Yeah, I agree.
We were talking before, just a memorisation of lines. It's very interesting when we bring this up, how different actors have it. Is it easy for you?
Pretty much it is.
Has it always been easy, or is that something that's just developed over time that you're now good at it?
It's always been fairly easy for me. I've always been the guy that can remember the song lyrics. I've always, it's like telling a joke. It's like a joke. If someone tells me a joke and I like that joke, it makes me laugh, I'll walk away and 10 minutes later, half an hour later, I can tell someone that joke.
Excellent.
Exactly as it was told to me. It's just always been like that. So it's always, for me, learning lines is just like learning a joke. It's like learning it's
just something that comes natural.
Yeah, it just comes natural to me. I can't explain it. A lot of people have asked me that, but I tend to learn lines very quickly. And don't get me wrong, I can get flustered and mess them up too, and all of a sudden get a go blank and go, what's that line again? What we all do it, but it's something I don't stress over either. Is learning lines. I know I'll learn those lines if I read the script enough times, and it's reading all of the lines. It's not just mine. It's the whole conversation.
It's just like knowing the whole song.
Yeah, that's
not just the chorus.
Yeah, that's right. And so I will learn everyone's lines. In fact, early days I used to have the bad habit of actually mouthing other people's lines while they were saying them on film. And directors would have to say to me, Tim, can you keep your mouth shut? And I'm like, what am I doing? And they're going, you're saying the exact words that they're saying. And we've got you on
camera. Yeah. It's funny because my first episode was with Eva Jalak, and she does the singing as well. So she talked about that it's like the songs, and that's how she learns her lines. It's about finding the rhythm in the words, so to speak.
It's about the rhythm of the conversation. And Eva, of course, that's how she does it. She's been singing in bands for years and years, and Eva's great. Eva and I have worked together on so many things, not just film, but we worked in production for years. We both were at the Adelaide Convention Centre for 10 years together there.
Awesome. I didn't know that.
Doing lighting, and before that for other production companies outside of the place. I
just caught up with Eva yesterday. She's in town at the
moment. Is she? So okay, I'll have to catch up with her.
All right. So you were saying before, besides being a bartender, what would be your ultimate role if you had to choose? If someone said, Tim, whatever movie you want or whatever character you want, your choice, let's go, we're going to do it. What would you like to do?
Nothing really. I'm not looking to be, like you mentioned, the Tom Cruise stuff and all that big blockbuster stuff's not me. It's not me. I like being...
Not jumping out of planes or hanging on to buildings?
Jumping out of planes sounds like fun, but, the fun's... It's good fun if you can do that sort of stuff, but, no, I like kind of simple... dramatic roles. I've been doing a bit of comedy, and I worked on that. I don't know if you saw that 48-hour film that we made a few years ago called Clicker, and it got the audience award for that group,
nice.
Which is a nice little award to get. And then one of the TV or streaming channels saw that and asked Adam Ovadia, as the young fellow that directed it and wrote it, if we could work on it and make it something better. So we've just shot a pilot episode of a series of that. When I say just, we finished shooting it late last year. So now they're in post-production at the moment of that pilot episode, and that's a comedy. And I really enjoyed working in a comedy. I love working in comedy. It's something I never pictured myself doing, even though people think, Tim Hawkins is the funny guy, he's always got a joke and all the rest of it. That comedy wasn't something I'd really thought about until I did it. And then,
an acting perspective.
Yeah, as an actor. And then I did it, and I really loved it. And again, having a good director, and Adam Ovadia is an excellent young director, and he knows how to pace the comedy really well, and it was a really, really good fun role to play. The guy that I was playing was nuts. He's a nutcase.
Love it. But in a funny way. In
a hilarious way. He plays this guy called the TV King, and he runs a company selling TVs. But it's a front for he's a crime boss.
Okay.
But it's funny, and his salesmen in his TV shop are all running around. They're called his Knights of the Round Table, and they've all got like knight helmets on. They're all wearing like medieval helmets and selling TVs. It's crazy. It's really crazy.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun making it, and the character is absolutely nuts. In fact, all of the characters in it are nuts.
I'm going to certainly look out for that one.
Yeah.
Tim, at the end of the podcast, I've been doing this with all my guests now. This is my favourite one. What would be your T-shirt quote? I'm wearing my T-shirt. It's not a quote, so to speak,
T-shirt quote. Does it have to be a T-shirt quote, or it can just be my favourite quote?
It can be your favourite
quote. I made a quote in 2018. I don't know if you saw it. I put it up on Facebook for a few days. It said, "It will take us our entire lives to learn everything we will need to know to get through it."
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that. Well, there's your T-shirt quote. You can put that on a T-shirt.
Yeah, it'll have to be small writing, because it's all...
And the big thing about that question is that everyone that I've asked, and I've never stipulated what sort of quote, it's always a motivational quote. So it draws on something that they've learnt. That's what I like about the question. So, All right, what one person, dead or alive, would you like to have dinner with if you had the chance?
Grandfather.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, my grandfather. I haven't seen him since I think I was about 17 years old when he passed away, maybe 18 years old. But
so he was young when he passed?
No, he was in his mid-80s when he passed. But he had my mother was one of the youngest out of 9 children. So he was older when she was a kid.
That makes sense.
No, he was probably my largest influence in my life. He was the guy that got me into music. He was a concert violinist himself.
Awesome.
And he was, he was a pretty cool guy. He was a vegetarian in the 60s and 70s.
Wow.
Which was fairly progressive back then. He was into meditation and a lot of Eastern culture stuff as well. And he had
very progressive.
Yeah, and he had a hobby farm that he worked as well, that they lived on. So
nice.
Yeah, to be him, I'd have him back, and we could probably sit down and listen to some music all night and just talk about that.
I love that. That's fantastic. Binging TV shows. Do you do that?
Oh,
what was the last show you did binge?
Look, I binge everything.
It's the only way to watch things these days.
Yeah, I can't bear it when shows come out week to week. You know, I'm watching Better Call Saul at the moment. I've got to wait each week for that. Yeah, that's the prequel to Breaking Bad.
I think the last season's on now, isn't it? Yeah, so I'm
assuming it is.
I'll be able to binge that because I haven't been able to watch it week to week.
But then I watched. I didn't watch anything of Shameless. You know, remember the show Shameless?
Yes, way behind on that again.
Well, there was 9 seasons before I ever started watching it, and I binged the whole thing over a 6 month. Like I watched 2 episodes every day for about 6 months.
And there's pros and cons.
Well, it's William H. Macy now. The guy's just brilliant.
Oh,
he's
awesome.
absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
All right. And is there any questions in this podcast that I should have asked?
No, I don't think so. I think the things you left alone were well left alone.
That's the thing. Is there anything you wish to confess to me? I'll play the priest now.
No, not
good.
really. No, I've been a good boy.
And to really wind it up there, is there anything that you want to ask me?
Have you got any good roles coming up?
No.
You can't give a one-word answer.
No, I could pretend. Well, I've got things that I can't talk about. No, I've done a couple of auditions at the moment that are the auditions in. You go, have I not heard anything because I didn't get it, or have I not heard anything because they haven't made a decision yet?
Yeah, it's stuck between that.
That rock and hard place.
Yeah, well, that's a nightmare. I don't enjoy that at all.
No, it'd be nice to know. I mean, there's been pushes in the industry. They've just done the union, the MEAA, has just brought out guidelines for your self-tapes that you have to have a certain amount of time to submit, and all these rules. They're not rules per se, but just more guidelines. But they were pushing for people to have those to be told, and I don't think they can. I mean, when you've got 500 people auditioning for a role, and you can't be expected for them to say, "Hey, here's your feedback" and everything like that. It's just a nature of the industry, so to speak. So, well, Tim, I think that comes to the end. Now, do you have any social media that you'd like to present? Do you have your own acting Facebook page or anything like that?
Yeah, I've got my actors page on Tim Hawkins Actor is on Facebook, and that's pretty much it. That's about it.
Nice and easy. And you've got an IMDb page.
Yeah, I do have an IMDb page as well, which is it's fairly up to date.
And we've got a couple of links on IMDb because we've worked on similar projects, so that's beautiful. Mm-hmm. So, well, Tim, thank you very much for being my first in-person interview as well. It wasn't as scary as I expected.
No, thanks for having me, Dave. I appreciate it.
And it's and I know you didn't get the chance to be on that other podcast. We'll just set that other podcast. But you certainly, I wanted you on this one. I only run it monthly, so it's about juggling and getting people on board. And I'm really glad that you've been on board now.
Oh, you've had some good people on here, mate. I was impressed with some of the people that you've got coming on.
And that's what I want to do, is I want to find that knowledge base and that experience set and have a bit of diversity in people that we talk on, sort of thing. So, and I certainly want to bring it back to Adelaide, and that's why I wanted you on board, because you're so ingrained in the Adelaide acting community, and everyone knows Tim Hawkins. It showcases how much you are involved in a heavy way on both sides of the camera, and people adore that and love it.
I've been lucky, mate, to be perfectly honest with you. I've just put myself out there, and I've just been lucky to, that people have liked what I can do, and
and you're sharing your knowledge. That's what I like about you, is that you similar to me. You sort of want, if someone's looking for some help or some knowledge, you're there every time to say, "Hey, this is what I know." So I love it.
Well, they say when the tide comes in, all boats rise, mate. Like if we're all working on a film and and I can help someone develop that character better, or work that character better, or just make that scene work a bit better, I will do it, you know, and offer, you know, sort of some assistance, you know, and they can take it or leave it. It's up to them. But you know, I'm always there to help people on set. I like working with other actors around me on set, and if I'm giving my best, I like other people to be giving their best, and so I try and bring the best out in people all the time as well.
Quid pro quo. I love it. Awesome. Tim, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot,
It's been
Dave.
a pleasure. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening in to Tim.
Cheerio.